Hi, the SI meteorologist, Paul Dorian here on Wednesday, December 5th. Well, it's been several weeks since we've had an update on solar cycle number 24. Well, it continues to underperform. It's been relatively quiet on the sun in recent weeks, despite the fact that we are approaching a solar maximum that should occur sometime in the middle or latter part of 2013. Here's the very latest solar image. A couple of sunspots are clearly visible right here, but they're continuing to rotate around the sun in this fashion, and it looks like on the heels of those sunspots, it's virtually spotless right now on the rest of the sun. So it's entirely possible that once these rotate out of the picture, it'll be a spotless sun, which hasn't happened yet this year. But the bottom line is solar cycle 24 continues to underperform. It's a weak solar cycle in terms of historical comparisons. It looks like it may be the weakest solar cycle since the 1906 solar cycle, or if not then perhaps a little bit later, about 1928. There was a weak solar cycle that peaked in 1928. It's certainly on pace to be one of the weakest solar cycles in many, many decades. Here's a little bit of a longer term view of the current solar cycle compared to the previous one. This is from a NASA November prediction chart on the sunspot numbers, and right now we're at about 58, which puts us right about in this region right here. So this is showing the range of predictions with the high end here and a low end here. We're actually a little bit below the average prediction for this solar cycle, which again should peak sometime in the middle or latter part of 2013. This solar cycle continues the trend of weaker and weaker solar cycles. This solar cycle is weaker than the prior one that peaked back in about 2000. That solar cycle was weaker than the one before that, and there are certainly some solar scientists that are now predicting that the next solar cycle, number 25, will be even weaker than this one. What are the ramifications? Well, there's certainly research that indicates that not only the weakness of the solar cycle, but the length of the solar cycle can have an impact on Earth temperatures. And in this case, it looks like this may very well extend out to be a longer and longer, yet a weaker and weaker solar cycle. And that certainly can contribute to cooler Earth temperatures in the longer term over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years or so. So certainly we'll continue to monitor this situation. That also combined with the fact that the largest ocean on the Earth, the Pacific Ocean, has slipped into a cold phase, leads some to believe that we may be headed towards a colder period on Earth over the next several years. Here's just another plot to look at the comparison with what's happening right now on the sun in terms of sunspot numbers and the general prediction for this particular solar cycle. And again, we're down in this region right here. The latest reading on the monthly sunspot numbers is about 58, which puts us right about in this region. Most of the predictions were even higher than what we're seeing right now. So there were solar scientists predicting a weak cycle, but it's actually weaker than some of those forecasts, and we're headed to what looks like an extended period. Typically, solar cycles take longer to go from the maximum to the minimum as compared to the minimum to the maximum. We bottomed out here, a long, deep bottom here in solar cycles back about 2008, 2009 or so, and that's when this particular solar cycle, 24, began. And again, it's supposed to reach a peak sometime middle or latter part of 2013 in this region here, maybe 4 or 5 years after it began, and then it'll take several years, maybe 6, 7, or 8 years to finally bottom out and reach a minimum at the beginning of the next solar cycle, number 25. Well, here's an even longer view of the sunspot cycles going all the way back to about 1600 or so, and again, there are reasons to believe that this particular solar cycle will be the weakest since either this one here that peaked in about 1928 or this one right here that peaked in 1906. The bottom line is solar cycle 24 is certainly one of the weakest solar cycles in terms of sunspots in many, many decades. And in prior times we had some long inactive periods on the sun here in the Dalton minimum time frame, and also a real famous one called the Maunder minimum, where the sun was really inactive for several decades, and both of these were associated with kind of cold global temperature periods, especially back in the 1600s into the early 1700s when the sun was quiet. there certainly were cold periods, and that is what we're continuing to monitor here at the siweather.com to see if we head towards a colder period as the sunspot cycles continue the recent trend of weaker and weaker cycles. That's it for now. We'll periodically monitor Solar Cycle 24 here at the siweather.com. I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian.